Hello, good morning. So, I have taken a topic. This recording is in continuation for certification for BRIT ISO 42001. And the topic which I have selected is operationalizing AI life cycle controls in product development. And the use case, because I'm working on banking, so I thought of selecting use case for fraud management in banking. Right. My name is Abhishek Srivastav. I have served as a AVP engineering and I'm looking for this certification. So let's take it forward now. Introducing ISO IAC 42001 and AIMS. But before that, why AI lifecycle controls in BFSI? This is very important. So we have seen so far there are so many numerous application in banking. They are aggregating and they are communicating to each other through transaction systems, right? And if there are transactions, it increases the chance of fraud detection or fraud, uh, raises the alarm for frauds. So rise of AI-based fraud solution. Banks increasing deploy AI for real-time monitoring, detection of behavioral patterns that indicate potential frauds. So with the involvement of UPI, with the involvement of interconnected merchant transactions, a lot of frauds has been introduced recently. And with the help of AI, right, we can detect these frauds well in advance. Second is a risk of unchecked models. So when we say models, that is a combination of algorithms, machine learning, right? So uncontrolled AI models can lead to bias, excessive false positives, and model drift that reduces effectiveness over time. So those models which are unchecked, we can use with the help of these uncontrolled AI models, and it helps to identify the bias, any kind of false tolerance within the system. And if there are frauds which are happening, why it is important that we should run the AI governance. So financial institutes require ethical, scalable, and audit-ready governance frameworks before deployment of any models, before deployment of any workflows into the production environment, and that makes the system compliant with RBI, with payment systems, and they could be very effective, right? And to meet all this, it is important that there should be a framework standard governance, right? With which is around AI management systems, and we used to call it AIMS, right? So um, ISO certification has come up with the 42001. The similar what we have 9001, 31000, right? For quality, for security, and for risk management certification. For AI management also we have this certification. It establishes the frameworks around lifecycle oriented governance structure, alignment of risk, ethics, transparency, and performance, focus on plan, do, check, act, PDCA methodology. So we have seen in all the ISO related frameworks this PDCA. That means you need to plan, then you need to perform some actions, validate those actions, and then act accordingly and modify or alter those changes. So this is very important ecosystem, right? As we talk about AI lifecycle in product development, right? s- for any life cycle in product, you need to understand how to control the frauds, right? The frauds from end-to-end perspective. S- When we look into the life cycle, the first thing, identify and understand the business requirement. Identify if there are any fraud detected objectives or success matrices, right? And if these are how to mitigate those things, it is very crucial part once you are taking the requirement, noting the requirement, and converting into artifacts. Next is since the system has to be integrate or aggregate with many systems, right, around. Take example, for banking, you need to connect with ATMs, you need to have lending softwares, you need to have merchant softwares, you need to integrate with other systems, right? So integration is important. That means your data collection is very important. This data collection, the cleansing is very important. Compliant system has to be there, right? So, and the data, if you are taking into our ecosystem, it is important to take the consent of the end user, which is very important, or the consent of the merchant in case of B2B. Once you have the data, right, this data has to go thoroughly going through a model training, right? Model training and explainability. So develop transparent models with document decision paths. So it's not only that we have to create the models, but what is important, document and provide the reasoning and explainability why this model has been prepared, what is the path of workflow purpose, what is going to be outcome, right? And if this outcome is not as the original what we predicted, right? Then what is the mitigation or control strategy? Once you prepare that model, it has to be go through a thorough testing for bias, for fairness, for transparency, for ethical. So it requires some validate model performance across diverse scenarios, right? And once this thorough testing is performed and successful, then it requires to go into deployment into production environments with proper controls and monitoring in place, right? Once you deploy this, there is a proper monitoring team, right, which requires to do track or traces for drill performance and potential misuse. So there are different types of strategies. One is to look into the model, look into the outcome of these models, and then take action, right? Second is you need to have real-time monitoring systems for deployments, right? Like Dynatrace. Moving to next, fraud AI platforms, key risk and controls, right? So here we are talking about uh, key risks which are associated from your data, model, deployment, and uses, and how to mitigate those things. So take example for data, right? They are skewed transaction types. So skewed means there are so many distributed transactions within one, right? And the percentage of successful could be 98, the fraudulent transaction could be 2%. How to identify those fraudulent, how to mitigate those fraudulent. So, and then come up with a system which is trustworthy, unethical, right? So there is a control strategy which we talk about balance sampling, okay, and synthetic data. So if the data is incomplete, we can have add-on data synthetic and then try to define the pattern and then create a balance sampling. Same way goes for modeling, right? Overfitting on past frauds. So past frauds, identifying the patterns, right? And then take the action, cross validation or adversarial testing, right? So look into the solution adversarial, try to create a fraudulent system, prepare your model so that at the outcome you should not have the uh, this kind of fraud transactions, right? So these are the strategies. Same way for deploy drift due to seasonal changes, right? So take example, when there is a festival, there is a lot of transactions. When there is a summer holiday or winter holidays, there are a lot of transactions on travels, right? Festival, there is a lot of transaction on e-commerce. So data gets changed every time. And and if there is an increase in demand, there is an increase in fraudulent transactions too. How to mitigate those things? So for that, you have drift monitors, rollback policies, right? So monitor those transactions which are unethical, right? Which are unpatterned from, and if those are coming up, what actions has to plan, how to mitigate this, right? Or in case if that is not controllable, can we roll back, those transactions which are defined for policies due to seasonal changes and roll back, right? Coming to uses the production environment, right? Once the transactions are live, there are high chance of high false positives. So it's not a mandate that every transaction or every, you can say, a person is culprit, right? It could be a chance that because of our incomplete data, because of unbiased data, right, the results are getting obsolete. So how to mitigate those things, right? By using the explainability, human overriding logics, right? We can define the workflows of the model, what is going to be outcome, right? And if, take example, CIBIL score, if it is giving unbiased result, there should be a moral check by a human, right? Whether this logic is correct or no. So by implementing all this, we can control any risks which are associated. But this has to be properly documented, properly discussed in our AI governance, and it should be properly tracked in AI management systems. Moving next, embedded controls in dev and product workflows, right? So we are talking about continuous integration and continuous delivery, right? Because of the changes which are highly in demand, the regular releases which are getting released in production environment, live transactions, right? It is really important that we should integrate our AI management system and following the agile practices, and it should have CI/CD pipeline, right? It is very important, the owner of the product, right? Who is product owner, product manager, or product director, right? Once the systems is gone through the live transactions, giving a serving at different industries, maybe e-commerce, as we discussed, maybe a defense system, maybe another systems, right? It should be fault tolerant, right? It should be there should not be any bias, there should not be on. So all these practices which we are talking about, it should be properly addressed during the different types of meetings, governance cadence, which we talk about. Okay, and they are proper compliance people from finance, from legal, from government body, who should participate and make system more reliable, more trustworthy before making a live. Very important. And next is, which is important, document and explainability. As we discussed, implement model cards and fairness dashboards. So there should be a proper dashboards as a core product, which will talk about all the end-to-end explanatory for different workflows, and we should document that. So there are some tooling for lifecycle governance. So once your workflows is live, right? It is important that you should deploy MLOps platforms, monitoring solutions. When we look into MLOps, right? Model management, track experiment, register models, and manage deployment pipelines. These are important to track your models. Since a model can go with different releases, right? Every time it requires plan to act and check, right? And then it is important that we should maintain lineage of models and dataset to ensure traceability, version control, right? And as we discussed, the pipeline should be automated. So ensure CI/CD for models to have more efficient and more real-time transaction. It should not impact the user, right? End user. Monitoring solution to be in place, monitoring for bias, concept drift, data drift, and explanatory violations. So we should have all the transactions, all the modeling workflows to be in place, right? Real-time performance tracking, evaluate model KPIs against accuracy, precision, latency during the live transactions, and report, notify through alerts, auto alerts, and incidents, so that the team can take proper action. So there are some governance which we talk about: consent management system, capture, store, and manage user consent for AI processing, person data, biometric data. It is important that we should take the consent from end user. Co- Comprehensive audit logs record all model access, data input, output, and user actions to enable traceability and accountability. Right? Audit is very important. GRC aligned AI policy management. So governance, risk, and compliance system tailored to manage AI ethics policies, uses guidelines, and risk. So it is very important. This AI management system should not only us should work standalone. It should integrate with different major ISO solutions, right, which are there in as part of corporate governance. So that the governance for related to product, related to services, related to models, this could be discussed in large forums and in proper sign-offs, proper directions, proper inputs or feedbacks can be collected. Automated compliance reporting, automated regular or you one should automate regular reporting, model performance log, bias test, incident handling for audits and regulars. So our dashboard should be there. Our dashboard should give a proper justification, okay, or at least it should notify so that a proper reasoning can be worked upon by the team, right? Benefits to bank and product teams, regular governance, reduce regulatory risk, right? So in banking finance transactions, it is important that it should comply with RBI guidelines, ISO standards. Similar like in healthcare, we need to follow the HIPAA, right? Improve fraud detection. Better governance leads to more accurate models with higher trust from stakeholders, right? Streamlined audits, comprehensive documentation, explainability, right? Enable faster audits and more efficient incident response. Enhance customer experience. As much as we will govern, right? There will be few false alarms and prompt actions, right? Which will give a higher customer satisfaction and reduce support cost. Though we are talking, but there are challenges, right? Like finding a legacy fraud engines lack explainability. So it is important not to only develop the fraud transactions, right, as part of testing, but for every workflow there should be a explainability, right? So currently most of these things are not in place. Organization silos between product, model development, and compliance team. So people, the teams, they work in silos. There should be a governing body which will integrate all these different teams, group them together towards one vision, right? And work in groups, right? Resistant to change requires executive sponsorship. So the AI management system, AI governance, it is not a project, right? It is a cadence. It should be thoroughly run by the steering committee. It should be properly budgeted, approved, and executed. Or the board should give the approval. CXOs should give the approval because this has to be plugged in into the major your ISO systems, right? And who plays an important role? This CAIO, which is your Chief AI Officer leadership role, plays an important role. What is the role description? It defines policy development and implementation, cross-functional governance across different departments, right? He is the leader. AI performance matrix alignment. Define all these matrices not only for systems but for people, right? Who are participating into the forums. Define the races. Cultural transformation. It requires a shift. AI first strategy, right? People has to go through thorough learnings, right? And then based on learnings, develop the systems. It is a culture shift. Now, last the closing remarks, very important. Build cross-functional AI governance board. So established team we represent from product, technology, compliance, business unit. It is important that all the units work together to achieve one vision of the organization. Define aims, aligned KPIs, create matrices for balanced model performance with governance requirement. Operationalize life cycle controls we discussed, right? Implement control that make AI products accountable, reliable, and responsible. Scale to other use cases. Once you start with the small, deploy and take this practice and scale from other use cases as well. Start with fraud detection, take example, then move into KYC, credit scoring, and personalization. So, okay, so that the same practices, the same governance, the same common portfolio platforms can be used for different use cases, and justify our investment. These are implementation roadmap, phase one assessment, identify where we stand today, vision where we want to take our product company, right? And then identify the gaps and work on those gaps, right? So phase two is foundation, establish governance structure and document standards, right? So that this can be controlled, monitored, then integrate, embed controls in development workflows, okay, and train teams on new processes and tools. And at the last, once these are live, right, optimize resources in terms of not only technical but resources in terms of people also. Refine control based on performance data, expand to additional use cases, right? So that again value proposition can come out, proper return on investment on the funding which we received, right? And we can justify. At the last, which is important, effective AI governance is not just about compliance, it's about building trust in our system, delivering better outcomes to our customer. I'm signing off. Thank you.